I don't think I noticed when it changed. That's the thing about this particular kind of loss. It doesn't arrive with a timestamp. There's no moment you can point to and say, there, that's where it shifted. It's more like you wake up one day and reach for something that used to be warm and find that it's just room temperature now. And you try to remember when it cooled and you can't. You weren't watching, you were inside it, you were living your life, and now you're standing in the middle of something that looks exactly like what you had before and feels completely different. And you don't know what to do with that, because nothing technically happened. Nothing broke. Nothing ended. It just changed. Quietly, without asking your permission, without giving you any warning at all. That's what I want to talk about. Not the dramatic end of love, not the betrayal or the blow up or the relationship that crashes and burns in a way you can't at least narrate. The other thing, the slower thing, the thing where love just becomes something else. Something you recognize but can't quite feel the same way anymore. There's a specific version of the beginning of love that I think we spend a long time chasing without realizing that's what we're doing. You know the one, where everything about the other person is interesting, where you want to know every single thing about them, not because you're trying to assess them as a partner, not because you're running through a checklist, but because the information itself is fascinating, because it's them. Because every detail adds to this picture you're building and the picture keeps getting better, where you think about them in between seeing them, not anxiously, not the worried, overthinking kind of thinking, just the warm kind, the kind where they drift into your head while you're doing something else and it makes whatever you're doing a little lighter, where physical closeness feels like relief, where being in the same room as them is just better than being in a room without them, where you reach for them automatically without thinking, because reaching for them is just what your body does now. I'm not being naive about it. I know that phase doesn't last forever. I know it's not meant to. I know that what comes after it, the familiarity, the depth, the specific comfort of being truly known over time, is supposed to be richer, more real, more sustainable. I know all of that. But I also think something important lives in that early feeling that can get lost in the transition. And when it gets lost, when you notice it's gone and you can't find where you left it, it's one of the more disorienting experiences a person can have, because you still love them. You're sure of that. You're almost certain. But the love feels different now, and you don't know if different means deeper, or if different means diminished, or if different means something is wrong, or if this is just what love becomes, and you're supposed to be fine with it, and you don't want to say that out loud. Because saying it out loud makes it real. Because saying it out loud means you might have to do something about it. Because saying it out loud to the person you love means watching their face change in a way you can't take back. So you keep it in, and you try to figure out if what you're feeling is a truth or just a season. Let me try to describe what it actually feels like, the texture of it, because I think the experience is specific enough that it deserves specificity. It feels like going through the motions of something you used to do naturally, like the actions are all the same, the morning texts, the inside jokes, the way you find each other at the end of the day, but they're running on memory now instead of impulse. You're doing them because you've always done them, because they're part of the structure of this, because stopping would mean something. It feels like looking at photographs from a year ago and being genuinely moved by them, by what you see in both of your faces, by the obvious realness of what was there, and then looking up from the photographs and trying to locate that same thing in the room you're currently in, and finding something quieter, something steadier. But not the same thing. It feels like effort where there wasn't effort before. Not bad effort, not the effort of fighting or managing or holding something damaged together, just the low-grade effort of being engaged, of being present, of generating warmth rather than just feeling it. And you wonder, is this normal? Is this what they mean when they say love is a choice? Is this what mature love actually looks like, and I've just been comparing it to the beginning, which is an unfair comparison which everyone says you shouldn't make? Or is this something else? Is this the feeling of something that's quietly been running out? Here's what I think happens, and I want to be careful here because I'm not sure I have it fully figured out. I think love changes for a lot of reasons, and not all of them are bad. Time changes it. Comfort changes it. The way two people settle into each other changes it. The urgency softens, the novelty fades, the constant low-level electricity of early love, which is genuinely not sustainable and would burn you out, becomes something calmer. That's not death, that's development. That's the thing actually taking root instead of just flowering. But I also think love can change, because something went unaddressed, because two people drifted in a direction nobody named, because small resentments accumulated without being resolved, because one person changed and the other person didn't fully notice, or noticed and didn't know how to talk about it, because the communication that would have kept things close got replaced by the comfort that assumes closeness without checking. And those two things, natural development and quiet erosion, can feel almost identical from the inside, which is why it's so hard to know what you're dealing with, which is why people stay in things that have quietly stopped working for years, and also why people leave things that only needed a conversation. The feeling of distance doesn't tell you its own cause. You have to do that work yourself. I want to talk about the loneliness that lives inside this because I think it's one of the loneliest experiences there is, and it almost never gets named. You are with someone, you love them, you are committed to this, to them, to the life you've built together, and you are lonely. Not always, not completely, but in a real and specific way that you don't know how to explain to anyone, including them. You are lonely for the version of this that used to exist, for the version of them you fell in love with, which is not gone exactly, just harder to access. For the version of yourself that existed inside that early love, that felt so lit up by another person, that moved through the world with this specific lightness that came from being fully, recently chosen. You miss a feeling that technically hasn't ended. You grieve something that is still here, and you can't say that. Because if you say that to the person you're with, what you're saying is, I love you, but being with you used to feel better than this. And that is true and real and doesn't make you a bad person, but it will land like a wound, and you know it. So you carry it. You try to generate the feeling through action, through dates and gestures, and recreating the conditions of the early thing as if the early thing was a recipe you could follow. Sometimes that works for a night. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of it and it's enough to keep you going. Sometimes it doesn't work and you sit across from someone you've loved for years, feeling further away than the distance between your chairs. There are things that change love that we don't talk about honestly enough. Disappointment changes it. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The accumulated weight of small moments where they weren't who you needed them to be. The times you needed them to show up and they didn't. The conversations you tried to have that went nowhere. The ways they've let you see them clearly. And some of what you've seen has been harder to love than you expected. You still love them, but loving someone and being disappointed by them at the same time takes up space. And if the disappointment never gets addressed, if it just gets filed away, handled, moved past without really being resolved, it builds up somewhere, and it changes the texture of the love, makes it a little heavier to carry. Boredom changes it too, and I know that's uncomfortable to say, but I think it's true. Not boredom with the person necessarily, boredom with the shape of things, with the predictability, with knowing exactly how most conversations are going to go, how most evenings are going to end, what they're going to say about any given topic before they say it. That predictability is also comfort. It's also safety. It's also the thing people mean when they say they want a partner, and not just a feeling. But it can quietly drain something from the experience of being together if nobody tends to it, if you let the routine become the whole thing. And then there's change itself. People change. You've changed. They've changed. And sometimes two people change in directions that continue to align, and sometimes they change in directions that quietly diverge. And if you're not paying attention, if you're assuming alignment because that's how it used to be, you can find yourself standing next to someone who is genuinely different from the person you fell in love with without either of you having done anything wrong. I want to say something about the guilt, because I think people who feel this carry a disproportionate amount of guilt for something that isn't a moral failing. You didn't choose for love to feel different. You didn't decide one morning to care less, to feel less, to be less moved by the person you've committed yourself to. It didn't happen because you weren't trying hard enough or grateful enough or mature enough. Feelings don't work like that. You cannot effort your way into an emotion. You cannot guilt yourself into warmth. And yet most people who feel this spend enormous energy blaming themselves for it, telling themselves they're selfish, telling themselves a better person would just appreciate what they have, telling themselves that if they were more emotionally disciplined, more grateful, more adult about the whole thing, they wouldn't be standing here wondering where the feeling went. That's not fair, and it's also not useful. The guilt doesn't bring the feeling back. It just adds a layer of shame on top of an already uncomfortable truth. And shame makes you less likely to address the thing directly, because addressing it means admitting it, and admitting it means facing the shame you've been trying to outrun. So you end up in this place where you feel something true, feel guilty for feeling it, can't address it because the guilt is in the way, and the thing just continues. Let the guilt go, or at least set it down long enough to look at what's underneath it, because underneath it is just a person who loves someone and is trying to understand why something that used to feel one way feels different now. That's not a character flaw. That's just being human in a long relationship with another human who's also changing all the time. You're allowed to feel this and still be a good person. You're allowed to name this and still love them. You're allowed to be confused and uncertain and a little sad about the distance between now and then, without it meaning that everything is over. Give yourself that much. You've been carrying this long enough without that. So what do? I don't think there's a clean answer to that. I think it depends on what you're actually dealing with. Whether this is natural development or quiet erosion, whether the love has changed or the relationship has stopped tending the love, whether you've grown apart or just stopped checking in. But I do think the first thing is naming it. Saying it somewhere, even if just to yourself first. Not dramatizing it, not catastrophizing it, just being honest about what you feel. Love feels different now. I don't know what that means yet, but it's true, and I'm not going to keep pretending it isn't, because the pretending is what makes it worse. The pretending is what lets the slow erosion continue unchecked. The pretending is how two people who once loved each other deeply and fully end up feeling like strangers sharing a space, both of them grieving something neither of them ever named. You owe it to yourself and to them to name it, not as an accusation, not as a verdict, just as information, as a real and honest thing that's happening inside you that the relationship deserves to know about. Because sometimes naming it is what brings it back. Sometimes the conversation you've been afraid to have is the thing that opens a door you thought had closed. Sometimes love that has quieted down is not love that has ended. It's love that stopped being tended and just needs someone to tend it again. And sometimes you name it and you find out that you've both been feeling it. That you've both been carrying this private grief about what used to exist. And somehow, impossibly, that shared grief becomes the beginning of something closer than what you had before. Because you're finally actually in it together instead of separately managing the loss of it. That happens, it really does. But also, and I want to say this gently but clearly, sometimes love changing is love telling you something true. Sometimes the feeling shifted because the fit was never quite right, and the early love was too loud to let you hear that. Sometimes you've grown into a person who needs something different from what this can give. Sometimes the relationship has run the length of what it was, and holding on past to that point isn't loyalty. It's just fear of the loss, and that's a hard thing to know, and a harder thing to act on. And I'm not telling you what to do with it. I'm just saying the feeling is information. It's not a betrayal, and it's not a failure, and it doesn't make you a bad person or an ungrateful one. It's just honest. The most honest thing your heart knows how to do is feel what it actually feels. And if what it feels is that something has changed, then something has changed. The question is whether what's changed is a beginning or an ending. Only you know that. But you have to be willing to actually look. Love doesn't feel the same anymore. That sentence can mean a lot of different things. It can mean it deepened. It can mean it drifted. It can mean you stopped tending it. It can mean you grew. It can mean you grew apart. But it always means the same first thing. It means you're paying attention. It means you care enough to notice. It means you haven't gone numb or given up or stopped trying to understand what's happening inside you. That matters. Paying attention is actually the beginning of everything. Whatever this is, whatever the love becoming different actually means for you, at least you're not looking away. At least you're still asking the question. That's where everything worth having starts. I want to ask you something, and I need you to actually sit with it before you answer. Not the surface answer. Not the answer you give when someone asks how things are going, and you say, "Good, yeah, we're good," because it's easier than explaining the thing you can't fully explain yet. Not the answer that protects them. Not the answer that protects you from having to admit something uncomfortable. The real one. Do they deserve you? And I already know what some of you are doing right now. You're softening it. You're reframing it. You're saying, well, it's not about deserving. Relationships aren't a transaction. Nobody's keeping score. And that's true technically. Love isn't a ledger. I'm not asking you to add up points. But I think we use that logic, it's not about deserving logic, to avoid asking a question that would give us an answer we're not ready for. We call it maturity. We call it seeing the full picture. We call it not being naive about how love works, Sometimes it's just avoidance with better vocabulary. So I'm asking again, slower this time. Do they deserve you? Let me tell you what I think deserving actually looks like in practice. Because I don't think it's about being perfect. I don't think it's about never messing up or never going through something that makes you hard to be around for a while. Everyone goes through something. Everyone has seasons where they're not their best self. That's not what I'm asking about. I'm asking about the baseline, the default, the way they treat you when nothing is wrong, when there's no crisis, when it's just a regular Tuesday, and you're both just existing in each other's orbit. Do they pay attention to you, not in a surveillance way, in a you matter to me way? Do they notice when you're off before you have to say you're off? Do they ask follow-up questions about the things you mentioned last week, or does everything you say kind of evaporate the moment the conversation ends? Do they show up not just for the big stuff like the emergencies, the celebrations, the things where showing up is easy because the stakes are obvious? The small stuff, the random Tuesday stuff, the I was thinking about you for no reason and wanted you to know stuff. Do they make you feel like being with you is something they actively want or something they're passively okay with? There's a difference. And you know the difference. You feel it every time they reach for you versus every time you're the one reaching. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. Most of us who end up in the wrong relationships, in relationships where the love is real but the care is uneven, where the connection is genuine but the effort is lopsided. We don't end up there because we're stupid. We end up there because we're hopeful, because we're good at seeing potential, because we genuinely believe in people and we're willing to stick around while they figure themselves out. That's a beautiful quality. I mean that with no sarcasm. But it also means we spend a lot of time loving people for who they could be instead of paying full attention to who they currently are. We're always working slightly ahead of reality, already in the version of this that exists 6 months from now, when they've grown into the person we see in them, when the relationship has settled into what we know it can be. And while we're living in that future version, the present version keeps not showing up, keeps texting back late, keeps going quiet at the exact moments we need them loud, keeps making us feel like we're asking for too much when we asked for the minimum, keeps doing just enough to keep us from leaving, but not enough to make us feel chosen. And we stay, because we can see it. We can see what this is building toward. We can see who they're becoming, except, and this is the part that's hard to say, they're not building toward anything. They're just here, right now, exactly this. And the version you keep waiting for is a fiction you wrote to make the present one livable. That's not love. Or, it is love, it's completely love. What you're feeling is absolutely real, but it's love aimed at a projection, and projections can't hold you when you need to be held. I want to talk about the stories we tell ourselves because I think this is where most of the damage actually happens, not in the relationship itself, but in the narration we build around it. You notice something, a pattern, the way they consistently make plans and then half cancel. The way they're always a little more present right after you pull back, then go quiet again once you come back. The way they talk about the future in vague terms that never quite include you specifically. The way you always feel a little bit like you're auditioning. You notice it, and then immediately, without even thinking about it, you explain it. They're just going through something right now. They're not great at communication, that's just how they are with everyone. They had a bad experience before you, and they need time to trust. They're stressed, they're distracted, they're working on it. And look, some of those things might be true. People do go through things. People are sometimes bad at communication. People do carry wounds from before you that take time to work through. But here's the question you're not asking. Why is it always your job to account for all of that? Why are you the one doing the interpretive work? Why are you the one translating their behavior into the most generous possible version so that you can keep feeling okay about being here? Why are you working so hard to make their absence make sense while they're not working at all to show up? You're writing them a story they didn't earn, and you're doing it because the alternative, believing what you're actually seeing, is a loss you're not ready to hold yet. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from this, and I want to name it because I don't think we talk about it enough. It's not the exhaustion of doing too much, it's the exhaustion of hoping too long. Because hope takes energy, real, physical energy. Every time you pick up your phone and feel that small drop when it's not them. Every time you replay a conversation trying to figure out if it meant what you wanted it to mean. Every time you prepare yourself for a version of them that doesn't quite materialize. Every time you choose to stay open when everything in you is starting to close. That's work. Invisible, unacknowledged, completely unsustainable work. And the worst part is you can't really explain it to anyone. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. You're together. You're okay. Nothing catastrophic has happened. There's nothing to point to. It's just this quiet, constant, low-grade drain, like a light you left on in a room you're not using. It doesn't seem like much, but eventually it runs something down. I want to be honest about something that I think gets glossed over in conversations like this. Sometimes the person doesn't deserve you, not because they're a bad person, but because they're a good person who is not built for what you need. And that is somehow harder. Way harder. Because if they were awful, you could leave and feel justified. If they were unkind or cruel or checked out completely, the decision would make sense to everyone, including you. But they're not awful. They're actually pretty good. They care about you in their way. They have real qualities that you love. They've been there for you in real moments. The history is real. The warmth is real. They're just not enough. For you, specifically. For the way you love and the way you need to be loved. And that's a loss that doesn't fit neatly into any category. You can't be angry about it. You can't even fully grieve it because nothing technically died. It just quietly wasn't what you needed. And the longer you stay, the more you reshape yourself to fit into something that was never quite your size. Deserving isn't only about behavior. It's about fit. It's about whether this person, as they actually are right now, is capable of giving you what you actually need. Not theoretically, not eventually. Now. And if the honest answer is no, even if you love them, even if they love you, even if it's real, that no matters, let me ask you something else. When you imagine your life 5 years from now, the version you actually want, not the version you've been negotiating yourself down to, are they in it? Not as a project, not as someone you're still patiently developing, as a person, as who they are right now exactly as they are, flaws and growth edge and current limitations and all. Do you want that, or do you want the idea of them completed? Because there's a version of staying that is really just an extended negotiation with reality, where you're not in the relationship you have, that you're in the relationship you're waiting for. And that waiting can go on for a long time if you let it. Long enough that you forget you were waiting. Long enough that it starts to feel like this is just what love is. It's not. Love is not a holding pattern. Love, real, actual, mutual, present tense love, feels like landing, like arriving somewhere, like the effort you're putting in is going somewhere and being met and building something. If it doesn't feel like that, if it feels more like effort into a void and hope into a silence, then I think you have your answer to the original question. They don't deserve you, not because they're terrible, but because deserving you means being present for you, means meeting you somewhere close to where you're standing, means caring enough to try in ways that are visible and consistent and real. And they're not doing that. Not enough, not yet, maybe not ever. Now here's the part where I have to be honest about the other side of this. Because this isn't a clean story with a clean villain. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the reason we end up with people who don't quite show up for us is because we make it too easy for them not to. We pick up the slack so seamlessly that they never feel the gap. We cover for their absence so naturally that they don't even register there's been an absence to cover for. We're so consistent, so giving, so reliably there, that they get used to being the one who receives. Not out of malice, not even out of selfishness exactly, just gravity. Things move toward the path of least resistance, and we made the path very smooth. And this is the part that's hard to sit with, because it's not about blame. You didn't do anything wrong by loving generously. That is not a flaw. But it might have accidentally taught someone that they didn't need to match you, that you'd still be there, that the relationship would hold regardless of their investment level. You trained them, sort of, without meaning to, rewarded their passivity with your presence, showed them that the minimum was enough to keep you. So when I ask, do they deserve you, I also want to ask, have you ever actually shown them what it looks like when they don't? Have you ever let the gap show instead of immediately filling it? Have you ever said out loud clearly without softening it, I need more than this, and if I don't get it, I will leave? Not as a threat, as a truth, as information, because some people don't know what they have until they're actually close to losing it. Not in a game-playing way, for real. Sometimes love needs to feel the gravity of its own loss before it learns to hold on. You've been doing all the holding. You haven't let them feel what it would mean to let go. Some people step up when that becomes real, some people don't. But either way, you need to find out. because the alternative is spending the rest of this relationship being the only one who's truly in it. And you deserve better than a love that only stays because you never gave it a reason to try. I keep thinking about this image, someone standing at a door knocking, not desperately, not frantically, just steadily, patiently, because they genuinely believe that eventually the door will open. And the door opens sometimes just enough light comes through that it feels like it's working, that the knocking is doing something, that they'll be let all the way in soon. And they keep knocking. I think a lot of us are that person. We've been knocking for so long that we've forgotten what we're actually asking for. We've gotten so used to the half-open door that we've stopped imagining what a fully open one would feel like. But you weren't meant to live in a doorway. You were meant to be let in. And somewhere out there, I believe this, I really do, somewhere there is a door that opens when it hears you coming, before you even knock. A person who doesn't need you to convince them, who doesn't require you to earn your place, who sees you clearly and wants exactly that. That person won't make you wonder. They won't make you wait. They won't make you build a story around their absence to make it survivable. They'll just be there, steadily, visibly, consistently there. I want to say one more thing before we get to the end of this, and it's the part I think people need to hear the most, even though it's the part most people are least ready for. You are allowed to leave something that isn't working, even if it isn't catastrophic. I think we've collectively decided that you need a really good reason to end something. Like there has to be a defining incident, a betrayal, a pattern of cruelty, something that would hold up in court almost. Something you could explain to anyone and have them nod and say, yeah, that makes sense. I get why you left. And if you don't have that, if it's just a slow drain, just a quiet mismatch, just the feeling of being slightly smaller than yourself for a very long time, then leaving feels selfish, dramatic, like you're giving up on something you should have stayed for. That is not true. Feeling consistently unseen by someone who claims to love you is a reason. Carrying the emotional weight of a relationship mostly alone is a reason. Reshaping yourself over and over to fit into something that was never quite built for you is a reason. Waking up next to someone and feeling lonely is a reason. You do not need their behavior to be unforgivable in order for your unhappiness to be valid. You do not need to wait for a catastrophe to justify protecting yourself. Sometimes the quiet reasons are the realest ones, the ones nobody else can fully see, the ones that live in the small daily accumulation of not quite enough. Those reasons are allowed to be enough. You are allowed to choose yourself. Not because they're terrible, not because the love isn't real, just because you know when you're honest that this isn't the shape of a life you want to keep living. That is a complete and legitimate reason to go. So, do they deserve you? You don't have to answer me, but I think you should answer yourself. Quietly, honestly, without the softening and the generous interpretations and the future version you keep projecting onto them. Just the truth of it. Just what you actually know underneath all the hoping. Because here is what I know about you. The version of you that loves this hard, that stays this long, that gives this much even when it's not coming back equally. That version of you deserves something that matches it. Not perfect, not without difficulty or friction or the occasional season where things are hard. Just matched. Genuinely, effortfully, show up even on Tuesdays. Matched. You have been so patient. You have been so generous. You have given so much of yourself to something that keeps asking for more without asking how you are. I think you know the answer to the question. I think you've known for a while. The only thing left is deciding what you're going to do with it. I used to believe that people stayed. I really did. I believed that the ones you let in, the ones you trusted, the ones you loved, they would always be there. That some bonds were unbreakable. That some people were permanent fixtures in your life. But life has a way of showing you the truth. It starts small, a friend who doesn't reply for weeks, a partner who drifts away without explanation, a sibling who moves on with their own life and forgets the moments you thought mattered. I remember the first time I felt it for real. I called someone I trusted, someone I thought would answer no matter what. And there was nothing. Just the ringing, the silence, the empty void where connection used to be. And in that silence it hit me. People leave. Not always because they want to, not always because they mean to, but sometimes just because life moves on without them. I kept trying to hold on. I tried texting, calling, making plans, being available. I gave more than I should have, sacrificed comfort, and ignored red flags. I wanted them to stay. I wanted the certainty of their presence in my life, but they didn't. And every time someone left, I asked myself the same question. Was it me? Was I not enough? Was I too much? Was I too quiet, too loud, too complicated, too simple? I overanalyzed everything, replayed every conversation, every laugh, every glance, trying to find the moment they decided to leave. And slowly that questioning becomes a pattern. You start expecting departure before it even happens. You brace for absence before it touches you. You begin to withdraw, to protect yourself from the inevitable pain. Because the truth is, the people you love, the ones you open your heart to, they don't always stay. And the weight of that realization hits harder than the loss itself. I stayed loyal, I stayed caring, I stayed present, and yet, one by one, they left. And every time it happened, I felt smaller, less certain, less safe, less myself. I began to notice the pattern. I saw the fleeting nature of human attention, of human connection. I realized that attachment doesn't guarantee permanence, that love, effort, and devotion don't always secure someone's presence. And the hardest part, the leaving isn't always dramatic, it isn't always loud or angry. Most of the time it's quiet, invisible, a slow fade until you're left staring at the empty space they used to fill. And in that silence, the doubt creeps in. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm unlovable. Maybe everyone leaves because I'm not enough. I want you to understand this part because it's the moment that defines everything that comes after. The moment you see that no matter how much you give, no matter how much you care, some people just leave. And it leaves a hole, a hollow ache that isn't just missing someone, it's missing the certainty that someone was supposed to stay. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just them leaving, it was me too. Not that I caused it, not that I pushed them away intentionally, but I realized I had been carrying people the way you carry fragile glass, careful, hopeful, afraid to let go. I gave everything I had, my time, my trust, my heart, without measuring if it was returned. And when they left, I felt betrayed. But the betrayal wasn't entirely theirs. Part of it was mine. Part of it was believing permanence was guaranteed, believing that love alone could anchor someone who wasn't ready to stay. I started noticing patterns. The friends who left when I needed them most, the people who only stayed when life was convenient, the ones I chased, overanalyzed, overexplained myself to. It wasn't that I wasn't lovable. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that I was giving to people who weren't prepared to meet me where I stood. I had built my sense of security around others' presence instead of my own. I let my happiness hinge on messages that may never come, on plans that may never be kept, on people who could leave without warning. And in doing so, I allowed absence to feel like failure. I began to question why I kept myself open to that pain. Why did I care more than they did? Why did I stay longer than they could? Why did I invest my energy in people who didn't match it? And slowly, painfully, I understood. It wasn't about them leaving. It was about me learning, about recognizing my patterns of overgiving, of chasing, of hoping for something that was never fully mine, about understanding that my heart was generous, yes, but it needed boundaries, that care and devotion are valuable, but only when matched. I realized I had been mistaking attachment for love, persistence for connection, hope for reality, and that realization cut deep. Because the truth is, attachment without reciprocity isn't love. It's longing, and longing without response is a weight no one should carry forever. I began to see how my fears of abandonment, of not being enough, had shaped every interaction. I stayed longer than I should have. I gave more than I needed. I pretended that absence didn't hurt. And the more I did, the more I trained myself to accept the inevitable. Everyone leaves in the end. But the key wasn't to stop caring. The key wasn't to build walls so high no one could reach me. The key was to notice the pattern, to understand my own role in it, to reclaim the power I had been giving away. It wasn't easy. Recognition always hurts. Self-reflection always burns. But understanding the why behind the pain was the first step toward freedom. And in that understanding, I began to glimpse something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Possibility. Not for them, not for the ones who left, but for me. Possibility that I could show up differently. Possibility that I could care without losing myself. Possibility that love didn't have to end with leaving. I started changing the way I showed up. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, I stopped over-explaining myself. I stopped chasing texts, calls, or attention that wasn't freely given. I stopped bending over backward to prove my worth. Instead of hoping people would stay, I watched how they treated me. I matched energy instead of giving more than I received. I let the ones who weren't consistent drift away without argument, without guilt, and for the first time in a long time, it felt calm. I learned the power of boundaries, real ones, not just the ones I whispered to myself at night. Boundaries that said, I will not stay in a space where I am not wanted. I will not beg for care. I will not diminish myself to keep someone around. Boundaries that felt like armor, but also like freedom. I realized something important. Leaving isn't always their choice. Sometimes it's a reflection of their own lives, their own struggles. Sometimes they leave because they can't stay. And that's not my failure. That's not a reflection of my worth. I started to internalize it. My love didn't have to be reciprocated to be valid. My care didn't have to be rewarded to matter. And the truth was, I was allowed to step back, to protect my heart, to save myself from the endless cycle of longing and loss. I practiced observing instead of reacting. I observed patterns. I observed moments where I felt drained, unnoticed, unappreciated. I observed my own feelings without judgment, and each time I reminded myself, I am enough. My presence matters. My energy is valuable. It wasn't about becoming cold or bitter. It was about becoming steady, calm, certain, about knowing my worth even when others didn't, about understanding that someone leaving didn't erase what I had to give. It just meant I had to give it to someone ready to receive it. And in that steadiness, something shifted. The panic I used to feel when someone didn't reply immediately started to fade. The ache I felt when plans fell through became manageable. I didn't stop caring. I didn't stop loving. I stopped sacrificing myself for the illusion of permanence. It was a quiet power, the kind that doesn't scream or demand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. And for the first time, I felt anchored not by someone else's presence, but by my own. I began to see life differently. People would leave. It was inevitable, but I didn't have to leave myself behind with them. I could show up fully, openly, honestly, and still walk away when it wasn't returned. I could value my heart enough to protect it, even when it hurt to do so. And that hurt. It was different now. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't panic. It was acknowledgement. It was understanding. It was a lesson, a refining fire, a guide for how to move forward without losing myself. And then one day I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping anymore. I wasn't measuring my worth against who stayed or who left. I was standing firmly in my own life, in my own heart, and it was enough. I still feel the ache of absence sometimes, but it doesn't define me. I don't need people to validate my presence. I don't need anyone to choose me to feel whole. I've learned that care is powerful, but self-respect is stronger. That love is generous, but boundaries protect the soul. I began showing up differently. I still care, yes, but selectively. I still give, yes, but intentionally. I still open my heart, yes, but to those who are ready to meet me there. And every time someone leaves, it no longer shatters me. It informs me. It reminds me of the patterns I no longer repeat. I stopped chasing ghosts. I stopped hoping for consistency from those who had none to give. I stopped believing that permanence was guaranteed, and in that clarity I found freedom. Freedom to grieve without guilt. Freedom to love without fear. Freedom to exist without needing permission. The truth is, everyone leaves in the end. But that doesn't mean I am left behind. It doesn't mean my love is wasted. It doesn't mean my heart is broken beyond repair. It means I am human. It means I am learning. It means I am growing. And in that growth, I found something stronger than attachment. Myself. I walk through life knowing that people may come, people may go. And that's okay. Because I am steady. Because I am whole. Because I am not defined by who chooses to stay, but by how fiercely I choose to honor my own heart. And that changes everything. I stayed. I grew. I am ready now. It always hits me hardest when the world is quiet. During the day there's noise, people around me, work, texts, errands, responsibilities. There's a rhythm to life, a way to keep moving without thinking too much. But night doesn't let you hide. Night strips everything down to its raw edges. The first few nights after we broke up, I didn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my own breathing. And in that silence, every memory comes rushing back sharp and uninvited. The way she laughed, the way her hair caught the light, the little habits I used to love, the way we used to talk late into the night, the plans we made that will never happen. It's cruel how the world can be so normal around you when your heart is unraveling. People keep scrolling, keep texting, keep living, and you're there still holding pieces of someone who's gone. During the day, I can pretend. I can distract myself with music, with conversation, with work. I can laugh, I can make plans, I can convince myself I'm fine. But at night, all that pretense evaporates. Night doesn't let you lie to yourself. Night makes the absence louder than any noise, the longing sharper than any pain. And it's not just sadness, it's that hollow ache in your chest, the one that doesn't have words, the one that sits there quiet and steady, reminding you of everything you lost. And in that stillness, you start to question yourself. Did I love too much? Did I care too much? Was I not enough? Could I have done something differently? You replay the conversations, the good nights, the fights, the silences. You try to find the exact moment it all went wrong, the exact word, the exact choice. And no matter how much you search, it doesn't matter. Because sometimes it's not about what you did. It's not about what they did. It's just that some things aren't meant to last. And yet night doesn't care about meaning. Night just opens the wound wider, just reminds you that the one person you wanted to stay is no longer there. That's when it hit me. The nights weren't making me weaker. They were showing me what I hadn't been willing to face during the day. I started noticing patterns in the way I thought about her, the way I checked my phone hoping for a message that would never come, the way I replayed our last conversation, analyzing every pause, every word, every okay that felt heavier than it should, the way I imagined a different outcome, as if wishing hard enough could rewrite reality. I realized that part of the pain came from me giving her more than I gave myself. I cared so deeply that I lost track of my own needs. I bent over backward to match her energy, to prove my love, to anticipate her feelings. And now without her, that imbalance became painfully clear. My heart was trained to give, but not always to protect itself. I saw how I had been chasing consistency from someone who couldn't offer it. How I had built a world where her approval mattered more than my own peace. And suddenly, the nights made sense. They weren't just lonely, they were mirrors. Mirrors reflecting the patterns I had repeated for years. The ways I gave too much, the ways I stayed too long. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It wasn't that I didn't deserve love. It was that I loved someone who wasn't ready to stay. Someone whose absence left more than just silence. It left a gap where I had invested too much, too quickly, too fully. And in that reflection, there was also clarity. Pain was teaching me about my boundaries, about the difference between care and overcare, about the value of giving love to those who could meet me halfway, not just taking it for granted. Night became less of a punishment and more of a teacher. Each hour spent awake, each tear shed, each memory revisited was a lesson in self-awareness. I realized I couldn't force someone to stay. I couldn't bend my heart around their hesitations or their inability to commit. And as much as it hurt, understanding that was freeing. It was the first step toward protecting myself. The first step toward respecting my own heart as much as I had respected hers. The nights still hurt, but now they carried meaning. They weren't just reminders of loss, they were reminders of growth. Reminders that my love had been real, that my care had been deep, that my heart was capable of giving fully. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to learn how to give it to myself as well. The first nights I tried to change how I felt, I failed. I thought maybe I could trick my heart, distract my mind, or numb the ache with noise and movement. But grief isn't a problem you solve. It's a presence you sit with until it no longer controls you. So I started small. I stopped rereading old messages. I stopped imagining her next move, stopped hoping for signs, stopped reaching into the empty space she left behind. I deleted the photos I didn't need, muted the notifications I compulsively checked, and told myself the truth. She isn't coming back. Not the way I imagined, not the way I wanted. I began creating boundaries I had never known I deserved. Boundaries that weren't about anger or bitterness, but about self-respect. I stopped answering when I didn't want to. Stopped chasing conversations that led nowhere. Stopped over-explaining my feelings to someone who couldn't hold them. I started giving my attention only to the people and things that reflected care back to me. And with those boundaries came a subtle power shift. I wasn't consumed by her absence anymore. The night still whispered her name, still nudged memories into sharp focus, but I was no longer collapsing under them. I observed the pain, acknowledged it, let it move through me, and then returned to myself. I was no longer the person bending, waiting, and stretching my heart to fit someone else's inconsistency. I was steady, I was anchored. I replaced desperation with selectiveness. I matched energy instead of chasing it. I learned that showing care didn't require sacrificing my own peace. I realized that being alone at night didn't have to be punishment. It could be reflection, a time to breathe, a space to understand my own heart. The nights didn't stop being lonely immediately. They never do. But now, the silence was softer. It was a quiet room where I could hear myself think, where I could notice patterns, where I could prepare to love again, not someone else, but myself first. The ache became tempered by clarity. The longing became tempered by choice. I realized that part of healing isn't forgetting, isn't rushing, isn't trying to feel normal again. Healing is learning how to stay whole even when the world is quiet. Healing is sitting with the hurt until it teaches you what it means to protect your heart, to honor your needs, and to see that love isn't a game of endurance. It's a reflection of mutual care, and you deserve to experience it fully with someone willing to meet you there. Night was no longer a place where I broke. It was where I built myself back up. Eventually the nights became quieter, not because the memories disappeared, but because I stopped letting them control me. I no longer felt like a ghost wandering through someone else's absence. Instead, I learned to exist fully in my own presence. I started noticing the small ways I reclaimed myself. I laughed without guilt. I made plans without hesitation. I let friends in without fear of being too much. I learned to fill the quiet with my own voice, not the echo of someone else's. And slowly I began to recognize a simple truth. The pain didn't break me. It refined me. I understood now that loving someone who couldn't stay wasn't a failure. It wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of timing, of readiness, of circumstances beyond my control. I had loved deeply, and that capacity for love remained mine. My heart was intact. My integrity was intact. And the nights, once a reminder of what I lost, became a testament to what I had survived. I still remember the ache, the longing, the late hours where silence felt heavier than anything else. But now that ache sits beside strength, not despair. I carry the lessons instead of the bitterness. I honor the love I gave, but I no longer tether my happiness to someone else's choices. I walk away from the nights with my head held higher, with patience, with calm, and with the knowledge that my heart is valuable enough to wait for someone who chooses me fully. It hurts, and it will hurt for a while, but it won't break me. Pain didn't claim me. It taught me. It sharpened my awareness. It taught me boundaries. It taught me self-respect. And most of all, it taught me that being alone at night doesn't mean being unloved. It means I'm ready to love myself fiercely, completely, without compromise. The nights are still there. They always will be, but I am no longer afraid of them. I am no longer haunted by what could have been. I am here. I am whole. And when morning comes, I rise, not as someone broken, but as someone who has endured. Someone who has grown, someone who is ready for what is meant to be, rather than clinging to what never was. Pain didn't break me, it refined me, and now I am ready. I think the hardest part about something ending is realizing it was already ending while you were still trying to save it. When I look back now, I can see it clearly. The small pauses, the delayed replies, the way their voice changed just slightly. Not enough to call it out, but enough to feel it. But back then, I called it stress. I called it timing. I called it, we're just going through a phase. Because admitting it wasn't meant to last would have meant admitting I was holding on to something already slipping through my hands. It didn't start badly. That's the thing. It started with intensity, with late night conversations that made sleep feel optional, with inside jokes that felt sacred, with that rush of feeling chosen, like out of everyone in the world, they saw me. And when you feel seen like that, you don't question it. You don't prepare for it to end. You just lean in. I leaned in fully. I memorized their patterns, their favorite songs, the way they said my name when they were tired. I built a version of the future in my head without even realizing it. Not a marriage and forever. Nothing dramatic, just consistency. Just comfort. Just them. staying. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like I was the only one building. They still talked to me, still laughed, still said the right things, but something was missing. Effort. And when effort slowly disappears, you start replacing it with your own. I texted first more often, I asked deeper questions, I reassured them when they seemed distant. I made excuses for their silence. They're just busy. They're going through something. It's not about you. And maybe it wasn't. But that didn't change the feeling. The subtle loneliness of being connected to someone who is already detaching. I felt it before I admitted it. That quiet instinct that whispers, "This feels different now." But I ignored it because I didn't want to be dramatic. Because I didn't want to lose them. Because I thought love meant fighting harder when things got uncertain. What I didn't understand yet was that love isn't proven by how hard you fight alone. And sometimes something isn't falling apart because you didn't try enough. Sometimes it's falling apart because it was never meant to stay together. But I wasn't ready to accept that yet, so I stayed. And I tried and I hoped, even when deep down a quiet part of me already knew this wasn't going to last. The realization didn't hit all at once. It wasn't some dramatic fight. No screaming, no slam doors, no final speech about how we want different things. It was quieter than that. It was in the space between texts. The way replies became shorter. The way conversations that used to flow for hours started feeling forced after 5 minutes. I remember staring at my phone one night, reading the same dry message over and over, trying to find hidden meaning in it. Maybe they were tired, maybe they didn't mean it that way, maybe I was overthinking. I was always the one overthinking. But overthinking only happens when something feels off, and something felt off. They didn't ask about my day the way they used to. They didn't notice small changes anymore. They didn't look at me the same. And when someone stops noticing you, that's when it starts ending. I tried to compensate. I became lighter, easier, less needy. I stopped bringing up things that bothered me. I told myself not to ruin the vibe. I convinced myself that if I could just be a little more patient, a little more understanding, a little less emotional, maybe it would go back to how it was. But here's the truth I didn't want to face. When something is fading, you can't love it back to life. You can't effort your way into someone's certainty. You can't compete with someone's indifference, and I started to feel tired. Not of them, but of carrying it. Carrying the conversations, carrying the reassurance, carrying the hope. It felt like holding water in my hands. The tighter I tried to grip it, the faster it slipped through my fingers. There was one moment I'll never forget. We were together, physically in the same space, but emotionally it felt like there was an ocean between us. They were talking, smiling, present, but not with me. And that's when it hit. You can feel alone even when someone is sitting right next to you. That kind of loneliness is different. It's heavy, because it forces you to admit something. You're fighting for something the other person already let go of. I went home that night with a quiet ache in my chest. Not heartbreak, not yet, just clarity trying to break through denial. I lay in bed replaying everything. The beginning, the excitement, the promises that weren't promises but felt like them. And for the first time, I allowed the thought to fully form. Maybe this isn't temporary. Maybe this isn't a phase. Maybe this is the end, just stretched out slowly so it doesn't look like one. And that's when the question changed. It stopped being, how do I fix this? And started becoming, why am I trying to save something that doesn't want to stay? That's a painful question, because once you ask it, you can't unsee the answer. And the answer was simple. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It wasn't that I didn't try hard enough. It wasn't that I failed. It was that this, whatever it was never meant to last. And deep down, I think we both knew it. I was just the only one still trying to pretend otherwise. Letting go didn't happen the day it ended. It happened in layers. First, I stopped arguing in my head. I stopped replaying conversations, trying to decode where it shifted. I stopped rewriting the past to make it feel fixable. Because once you see something clearly, you can't go back to pretending. I realized I wasn't actually scared of losing them. I was scared of losing the version of myself that believed this was finally it. The version of me that thought, maybe this time it'll stay. That's what I was grieving. Not just the person, but the hope. And hope is harder to bury than people. At first I wanted answers, closure, a clean explanation I could hold in my hands. But the truth is, not everything ends with clarity. Some things fade because they were only meant to teach you something, not stay with you forever. And when I finally stopped fighting the ending, something strange happened. I felt lighter, still sad, still disappointed, but lighter. Because I wasn't dragging something behind me anymore. I wasn't trying to convince someone to see my value. I wasn't overextending myself to maintain something that was already collapsing. I started noticing how much of myself I had minimized to make it work. How often I swallowed words. How often I acted unbothered. How often I accepted less than I needed just to avoid losing them. And that realization hurt, because it meant I wasn't just losing them. I had been losing myself too. But here's the part that changed everything. I didn't hate them. I didn't turn cold. I didn't decide love was stupid. I didn't convince myself I'd never care again. I just understood. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to show you what you tolerate, to show you how deeply you can love, to show you where your boundaries should have been. And once the lesson is learned, the connection has no more purpose. That doesn't make it meaningless, it just makes it temporary. I stopped romanticizing what it could have been. I stopped imagining alternate endings. I stopped wishing they would wake up one day and suddenly become the version I needed. Because if someone has to transform completely to love you properly, they were never aligned with you to begin with. Letting go wasn't loud, it was quiet. It was choosing not to text, not to check their social media, not to ask mutual friends how they were doing. It was choosing peace over curiosity. And slowly I started feeling like myself again. The version of me that didn't revolve around someone else's attention. The version of me that felt steady without external reassurance. The version of me that understood. If it was meant to last, it wouldn't have required me to shrink. And that's when the bitterness disappeared. Because I wasn't rejected. I was redirected. It wasn't taken from me. It was removed. And there's a difference. I used to think every ending meant failure. Like if something didn't last, it must not have been real. Or I must not have tried hard enough. Or maybe I just wasn't enough to make someone stay. But now I see it differently. Some things are real even if they're temporary. Some connections are intense because they were never designed for longevity. They burn bright. They feel significant. They teach you something and then they end. Not because you ruined them. Not because they were fake, but because they fulfilled their purpose. It was never meant to last. And that doesn't make it a waste. It made it a chapter. I stopped asking, why didn't it work? And started asking, what did it teach me? It taught me how quickly I attach when I feel understood. It taught me how deeply I love when I feel chosen. It taught me how easily I ignore my intuition when I'm afraid to lose someone. But it also taught me something else. I don't want half effort. I don't want uncertainty disguised as mystery. I don't want potential. I want consistency. I want something that doesn't require me to question it every night. Something that doesn't feel like I'm constantly auditioning for reassurance. Something that doesn't slowly drain me while I call it love. And if that means some things end early, good. Because I'd rather something end than stay in a space where it was quietly deteriorating. I no longer romanticize what we could have been. Because what we could have been would have required them to become someone else. And love shouldn't require transformation to feel secure. It should feel aligned. Now when I look back, I don't feel anger. I feel gratitude. Gratitude that it didn't drag on longer than it needed to. Gratitude that it showed me my patterns. Gratitude that it forced me to raise my standards instead of lowering them further. The ending wasn't a punishment, it was protection. And maybe the most powerful realization of all is this. If it was meant to last, it would have required effort from both sides. It would have felt steady. It would have grown naturally instead of being forced. Love that's meant for you doesn't make you anxious. It doesn't make you question your worth. It doesn't slowly fade while you're fighting to keep it alive. It stays. And if it doesn't stay, let it go. Because not everything that feels intense is meant to be permanent. Some people are lessons, some are mirrors, some are reminders, and some are simply experiences that prepare you for something deeper. But it was never meant to last. And now, I'm finally okay with that. Not because it didn't matter, but because I matter more. I used to believe that some people were meant to be in your life forever. That once you found someone who felt like home, someone who made the world quiet and the chaos manageable, you'd never have to let them go. She was that person, Every laugh, every small touch, every moment we shared felt like proof that this was different, that this was real, that maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of love people write songs about. But the truth is, I stayed too long. I held on too tightly. I gave her all the parts of me I thought would make her stay, and somehow it wasn't enough. She started drifting, slowly, quietly. At first, it was easy to ignore. A missed call here, a delayed reply there. I told myself it was work, stress, life getting in the way. I rationalized everything. I convinced myself that if I just waited, if I just gave her space, everything would go back to the way it was. But space doesn't fix distance when someone doesn't want to bridge it. And then the signs became impossible to ignore. The way her energy shifted when I was around. The way her eyes no longer lingered. The way her voice sounded polite instead of soft. Like she was here, but not really. And that's when the doubt started. The questions that eat at you late at night. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? Did I miss a sign, a word, a glance that could have made her stay? I kept replaying every moment, every conversation, every laugh, trying to find the turning point, trying to figure out when exactly the person I thought I knew stopped feeling the same way. And slowly, painfully, I realized something that broke me in pieces. Love isn't always enough, even when you care more, even when you give more. Even when your heart is wide open, it's not a guarantee that the other person will choose you the way you choose them. I lost her, the girl of my dreams, the one I imagined a future with, the one who made everything feel possible. She's gone, and the worst part, she didn't leave with anger. She didn't leave with a fight. She left quietly, slowly, like the space between us stretched so wide that neither of us could cross it anymore. Now I sit with the emptiness. The ache of missing someone who no longer wants to be missed, the heaviness of realizing that some dreams don't last. And I have to ask myself the hardest question of all. How do I move on when she was everything I thought I wanted? That's when it hit me. It wasn't just that she left. It was that I had been holding on to a version of her that never truly existed. I realized I had been clinging to hope instead of reality, clinging to the idea of her, the idea of us, rather than seeing who she really was and how things truly were between us. I had given her my everything without ever stopping to ask if it was being received the way I imagined. I overanalyzed every text, every laugh, every small moment, trying to find meaning where maybe there wasn't any. And in the process, I lost myself a little. I saw patterns I had ignored because they were uncomfortable to face. The late replies, the canceled plans, the enthusiasm that faded when I needed it most, the way she only showed up when it was convenient for her. I had made excuses for her. I had rationalized it, told myself, maybe she's busy, maybe she's stressed, maybe she doesn't know how to say what she feels. But deep down, I knew the truth. She wasn't choosing me, and that's when the self-reflection got real. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It wasn't that I loved too hard or too fast. It was that I was loving someone who wasn't ready, someone who couldn't meet me where I stood. I kept asking myself, why do I care so much about someone who doesn't care the same way? And the answer wasn't simple. I cared because I allowed myself to care. I cared because I invested my heart where it wasn't being nurtured. I cared because I believed in the what could be instead of the what is. I had been overgiving, overthinking, overhoping, and in the process I had allowed my happiness to hinge on someone else's choices. That was the real pattern, the dangerous one, the one that left me feeling empty, desperate, and questioning my worth. The realization was painful, but it was also freeing. It wasn't about blaming her, it wasn't about resenting her for leaving. It was about understanding how I got here, about seeing the ways I had let hope blind me to reality, about recognizing the parts of myself I needed to protect moving forward. It wasn't easy to admit, but I had to face it. I had to stop chasing someone who wasn't chasing me. I had to stop convincing myself that patience and loyalty could force love. I had to accept that sometimes, no matter how much you give, it just isn't enough. When you finally see the patterns, the truth isn't cruel. It's clear. And clarity is the first step toward moving on. The first step toward moving on wasn't forgetting her. It wasn't pretending I didn't care. It wasn't erasing the memories or the way my chest tightened every time her name appeared on my phone. The first step was deciding that I deserved clarity, respect, and reciprocity. I began setting boundaries, small ones at first. I stopped checking my phone obsessively. I stopped reading into her every word, every pause, every tiny signal. I stopped waiting for messages that might never come. I stopped hoping for a version of her that only existed in my mind. And in that space, this quiet, deliberate space, I started to notice something powerful. I could breathe again. I didn't need her validation to feel alive. I didn't need her attention to feel worthy. I didn't need her affection to prove my capacity to love. I began redirecting the energy I had spent on her, on analyzing, on rationalizing, on hoping, back into myself. I invested in the parts of me I had neglected. I did things that made me feel strong, whole, and alive again. I stopped over-explaining my feelings to her. I stopped justifying my worth to someone who had already made their choice. I stopped tolerating the moments of half-love, the silences that burned, the inconsistency that hurt. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to feel power returning to me. I observed my emotions instead of letting them control me. I matched energy where it existed, and I let go where it didn't. I realized that choosing myself didn't make me cold or bitter. It made me steady, grounded, and in control. I didn't turn my back on love. I turned my back on waiting for someone who couldn't meet me. I didn't stop caring. I stopped investing where care wasn't returned. I didn't stop hoping. I started hoping for something mutual, for a love that didn't feel like a battle of patience and perseverance. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm inside my own skin. I felt safe with my own heart. I felt like the person I had been before all the waiting, all the chasing, all the questioning. And that calm, that quiet strength was revolutionary, because it showed me that I didn't need her to be complete, that I didn't need her to feel whole, that I could hold my own heart and protect it without shame or guilt. I started seeing my past love not as a failure, but as preparation, as a lesson in what I would and wouldn't accept, as a reminder that my heart is powerful, but it deserves reciprocity, not half measures. The more I honored my boundaries, the more I recognized my worth. The more I invested in myself, the less I ached for what wasn't mine to hold. And in that space, I started feeling free. Eventually, the ache softened. Not because I forgot her, not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped letting her absence define me. I realized that moving on wasn't about erasing what we had. It wasn't about pretending the late nights, the small laughs, the moments I thought would last forever never happened. It was about carrying them differently, without letting them weigh me down, without letting them keep me from living. I started living for me, not in a loud, dramatic way, not to prove anything to anyone. I lived for the quiet moments where I could feel myself again, the mornings where I woke up without the heaviness of waiting, the evenings where I went to bed proud of how I spent my day instead of consumed by what could have been. And in that space, I discovered something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't angry, I wasn't trapped in what I had lost. I was steady, I was clear, I was open to life again. I realized the truth. Love isn't about holding on to someone who doesn't choose you. Love is about knowing your worth, protecting your heart, and being willing to step away when it isn't returned fully. Some people stay in your life forever, some leave quietly like she did. And that's okay. It doesn't diminish what you felt. It doesn't make your heart smaller or weaker, it makes you human. I learned to honor the love I gave her by giving that same love to myself. I stopped chasing what wasn't meant for me and started chasing clarity, joy, and connection that was mutual. I began to trust that the right people would meet me where I stood, fully, consistently, willingly. And so I moved on, not with resentment, not with regret, but with quiet confidence. I moved on knowing that the girl of my dreams wasn't lost. She simply wasn't the one for me. And that was enough, because the truth is, letting go isn't giving up. It's making space for something real, something that doesn't require hope to fill in the gaps, something that chooses you as fully as you choose it. And now I'm ready. Pain didn't break me. It refined me. Loss didn't define me. It prepared me. And moving on isn't the end. It's the beginning. I stayed, I learned, I grew, and now I'm alive again.